San Francisco 49ers nailed down the NFC West championship at the tail end of the Week 17 game against the Seattle Seahawks, barely holding off Seattle, but nevertheless taking the division and ultimately heading to the Super Bowl. Best division in football right now with Seattle, the Rams, and the Arizona Cardinals chasing the 49ers. What have those teams done to narrow the gap, which really is kind of narrow anyway when you consider how hard it was for the 49ers to fend off the Seattle Seahawks? And let's start with what the 49ers did, guys. DeForest Buckner being traded to the Colts was kind of a surprise, one of the key players on the defensive line, but they have done what they had to do to replace him in round one with Javon Kinlaw, and then the receiver they added, trading up to get Brandon Ayuk, as Chris said last week, this is the guy that Kyle Shanahan wanted. This is the guy he viewed as the top receiver to fit that offense. Peter, I think that for a team that has nowhere to go but down, they have done a pretty good job of treading water right where they are.
I thought John Lynch had the best week of anybody, any general manager, any franchise architect. Imagine that all along you're thinking, I have two jobs in this draft. I've got to replace DeForest Buckner, and I've got to get a franchise receiver. And then on Tuesday, imagine Kyle Shanahan calls Joe Staley and says, hey, just want to get an update on what you're thinking. And Staley then telling him and John Lynch, I'm going to retire. So now you don't have two big things to do in the draft. You have three. And by the way, just go find a left tackle, by the way. So what does he do? He not only gets the defensive tackle Kinlaw and the wide receiver Ayuk in the draft, but he trades a 5 and next year's 3. So the value essentially is for a 4 and a 5, you get for at least 1 year a guy who's going to be almost as good as any left tackle in football. Who knows what happens after 1 year? But John Lynch solved all three problems on one weekend. I just thought the 49ers had a tremendous draft weekend.
Yeah, they definitely did. I mean, they killed it. They would be one of the teams I would look at, yes, where it wasn't a ton of draft picks that jump out to you like some other teams, but it's the quality of the draft picks, to what Peter's saying. I still wonder in this whole thing, would Chris Ballard have traded away the 13th pick for DeForest Buckner if he knew Javon Kinlaw was going to fall to him at 13? I would love to know the answer to that, because I have the greatest respect of Chris Ballard and how he builds a football team. But, you guys hit on all of it. I just think, again, it just shows the leadership of Kyle Shanahan, and John Lynch, the GM. But let's not forget, Shanahan's the one, like Bill Belichick, who has last rights, and he's the one that makes these calls. It shows how good they are at running an organization, to me specifically, with the Trent Williams situation. To be able to keep it quiet with Joe Staley, not have anybody know, not hurt their trade leverage, and getting this awesome Hall of Fame left tackle from the Washington Redskins, where we know it was a delicate situation because Dan Snyder's not a big fan of the Shanahan family, and I think the feeling is probably mutual. To get that done, I just think shows that the 49ers are one of those teams that we talked about yesterday, Mike. They're in the 10 where you better watch out. They're doing things and have a clue, an organizational goal every year, and they're special that way.
Go ahead, Peter.
Mike, can I add one thing to what Chris said? And that is that, so everybody after the draft, when I wrote my piece from inside the virtual war room of the Bucs, the biggest comment I had is, boy, why did Jason Light have to give up his 4th round pick to move one spot when he knew that he was still going to get Tristan Wirfs? Just sit there at 14 instead of trading up with the Niners. And, that would make a lot of sense in all years except one, and that's this year. Because Light told me after the draft we had some intel that Joe Staley might be retiring, either that or whether he was going to retire, that he was very, very close to the end. And they also knew, this is not something I wrote, but they knew, John Lynch confirmed it to me yesterday, they really liked Tristan Wirfs. Not that they were going to take Tristan Wirfs at 13. They were going to take Javon Kinlaw. But they knew, the Bucs knew that there was interest in San Francisco in Tristan Wirfs, and that's why, in essence, they ended up having to make the trade.
Okay, so we've established the 49ers had a great weekend to already add to a great team. The Seahawks all in all, free agency and the draft, have they done enough to catch and maybe surpass the 49ers? They added linebacker Jordan Brooks in round one. They've gotten rid of a couple of offensive linemen. They've added offensive linemen. Do we see enough of an elevation of the Seahawks organization, Chris, to give them a chance to stay as close as they already were to the 49ers?
I do think so. I mean, I think they made the appropriate moves in free agency to go along with that. Let's not forget, Mike Iupati there to help the offensive line, Greg Olson, Cedric Ogbuehi, Philip Dorsett, trading for Quentin Dunbar from the Washington Redskins, who's a really good scheme fit for them. Bruce Irvin's back to come off the edge. And then, Mike, you mentioned it, the draft picks. Hey, Jordan Brooks is a Bobby Wagner type talent. That's what he is. And he'll be the replacement for Bobby Wagner at some point. But then getting a second round edge guy in Darrell Taylor from Tennessee, who's going to be a really fine player. So, yeah, I do think Seattle has, closed the gap a little bit, certainly. Seattle was a team that even through this winning process was still kind of rebuilding their team from that Super Bowl era team that we saw. So, again, I think John Schneider and Pete Carroll have certainly closed the gap a little, while the 49ers have done a great job too.
Peter, your thoughts on the Seahawks?
Yeah, sorry, Mike. My biggest thought is that, I don't agree with Chris altogether. I think that the 49ers really set themselves up as the premier team in this division. Not that the Seahawks didn't do anything, but in my opinion, they have tried forever to fix the offensive line. Maybe they will, but that's just going to be something I think we're all going to have to see first. And I don't think the Seahawks are done. I think sometime in the next week or so, they wait out Jadeveon Clowney and Everson Griffin. They sign one of those guys, because this is still a team that absolutely still needs another piece in that pass rush. They can't count on Bruce Irvin to be better than he ever has. And the only way that their pass rush today is great is if Bruce Irvin is a 15-sack guy. I don't see that in that defense right now. I think they end up, by the time the games are being played, they end up with either Clowney or Griffin, and then they're going to have a representative, tough, good pass rush. And and I'm not forgetting all the other guys that they have in their locker room. Obviously they made a lot of noise last year getting rid of Frank Clark and everything, and they replaced him with sort of more of a budget-conscious look. And just my thought is that I think San Francisco, they're very close anyway, but I think San Francisco and what the 49ers have done is they've distanced themselves from the rest of the division.
Between the Rams and the Cardinals, guys, and I'll start with Chris on this, which of the two teams is closest to breaking out of the bottom of the division and challenging the top of the division if we accept that it's the 49ers and the Seahawks in those top two spots?
Wow, it's really close. I mean, Arizona has made some big-time moves, as we all know, through the draft and free agency. They did. I mean, some of the free agent signings, Jordan Phillips, defensive tackle from Buffalo, Devondre Campbell, getting him at linebacker along with Isaiah Simmons in this draft. So now the second level of their defense is going to be much improved. Hopkins to that offense. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be huge. But I'm not going to lie, guys. I really like what the Rams have done this offseason. I mean, first off, I think the Rams kind of secretly killed the draft. They got their Todd Gurley replacement in Cam Akers, got another really awesome receiver in Van Jefferson. Terrell Lewis, I don't think the Alabama edge rusher, he was one of my top 5 edge rushers, Mike. I mean, he has a chance to be a superstar. My comparison was like Jonathan Abram, who ended up with John Abram. Remember him? He ended up with Abraham, 130-something sacks career-wise. They took a shot on him in the third round because he was injured a little in college. And then you talk about Leonard Floyd and getting back Michael Brockers and A'Shawn Robinson. I think the Rams quietly made some big-time moves. Yeah, they lost some names and some star power in Gurley and Clay Matthews, but those are guys that they're not the same guys that we used to know them as. And I quietly think Sean McVay and Les Snead have done a really good job this offseason.
Mike, I'm going to be very surprised if the Arizona Cardinals are not a 500 team or better. Very surprised. And I don't think any team in the NFL in this offseason so far has added of the magnitude of somebody on offense and somebody on defense as DeAndre Hopkins, a top 3 receiver in the NFL, and Isaiah Simmons, who can play 5 positions, and in my opinion, sort of rekindles what the old Todd Bowles Cardinals used to do, which is to take a guy and make him from being a strong safety and put him down in the box sometimes, move him all over the formation. You saw it with Tyrann Mathieu. You saw it with Dejon Buchanan. And you look at what the Cardinals have done, and I think that in helping Kyler Murray the way they have, and they still have a very effective Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, in my opinion, I think they're going to be a dangerous offense, and I think they're going to be a much improved defense. And as I say, it's going to be tough to win 8 games this year in that division. I think you're going to see the Cardinals do it.
Something that Chris and I have kicked around in the past, Peter, and this is tied to the scheduling formula. This year, the NFC West teams play all 4 teams from the AFC East, all 4 teams from the NFC East, with an extra wild card spot available. Do not be flabbergasted if all 4 teams from the NFC West are in playoff contention late. And there's a way the dominoes fall where all 4 of those teams get into the postseason in the first year of 7 spots per conference.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.